Hi, welcome to Box on the Box Rock and Celluloid, Botbrack for short. I'm over Box. Remember to share and subscribe to these videos if you enjoy them. So today, before I go into my top 10 director today, what I've been doing at the start of these is just sometimes mentioning, the few directors where I like some of their films, but just a top 10 is not possible. Now, the guy I'm about to feature is Canadian, and another great Canadian filmmaker at the moment is Denny Vellner. So the moment that I'm doing this video, it'll come out. You're seeing it now in 2022, but I'm actually shooting in 2021. I'm kind of loading up stuff. So I haven't seen his version of Dune, but Blade Runner 2049, Sicario and Arrival, Prisoners and Enemy are all really good. I haven't seen Indices. I need to see that. So, he'd be close to a top 10. We could do one. He just hasn't quite got the films yet. There's a couple I haven't seen earlier ones in his career. So he's another filmmaker who would definitely get one of these. Another one's like Robert Altman, a key 70s filmmaker. Just going to move forward a bit here, sorry. I love McCabe and Mrs. Miller. Nashville's really good, The Player. Never Got Away with MASH. It's a weird film. I always quite enjoyed Quintet as well, even though it was a flop. And there's a few films of his I've got to check out, but again, there's probably not enough there for me to plough ahead with a top 10. So yeah, I said the guy today's Canadian is David Cronenberg, a guy who started out as a kind of exploitation filmmaker, I suppose, in the horror genre, but he's kind of stretched out of that, but he still has horrific violence, and there's a lot of themes that still appear in his films. A couple of films didn't make the cut. A Videodrome, I was kind of debating whether to have that in my top 10. Some cool images. James Woods at his sweaty best, and of course Debbie Harry. Never quite got a grips with it, but some important Cronenberg images, ones that we'll kind of revisit later on. And then Eastern Promises, his thriller from 2007 with Viggo Mortensen as a Russian gangster, set in London, really gritty, great fight scene. On part of a kind of upswing really for Cronenberg after a slightly lean period. Okay, so my number 10 choice is Scanners. This is his 1981 The Exploding Head film. So this fits firmly in the horror cycle of psychic horror. You've got Patrick, I think like Richard Franklin, about 78. And is it The Sentinel as well? Is that another one, psychic horror? Michael Winner. Can't quite remember. The other one, most well-known one for me is The Fury, which has telekinesis, I should be saying, rather than psychic. So the people in Scanners have telekinetic power, and they can make people's head explode, and basically climaxes with a great head explosion. I was actually reading up about how they did the effects, and there was a lot of trial and error. I think, like Cronenberg's early Canadian films, what lets these down is aesthetically. The photography is not great, but sometimes the acting isn't always what it should be. He cast some really good actors, like for instance, I think Michael Ironside's in Scanners, but sometimes his male leads are just lacking that sort of extra presence that's needed. Scanners also got Jennifer O'Neill, who's an Oscar-nominated actress back in the day, but he's not quite got a grips with actors, is my feeling. But later on, he will be a very good actor's director. One of the things to say about Cronenberg, like a lot of horror directors, he doesn't do kind of flashy camera shots like Wes Craven, and he's working in horror then. He doesn't move the camera a lot. There's not slow-mo, much of that. He doesn't draw attention to it. When there is attention drawn to the screen, it tends to be because of the ultra-violence, which he shoots pretty flatly with a kind of hyper-realistic detail. Okay, my number 9 choice is looking at his Crash. So I went to see this I went to see this back in '96 on a cinema day when you could get in Britain, when you could get in for £1. I think I saw this and The Wild Bunch, and what was the other one? Fargo, and I saw From Dusk Till Dawn. That was a good day. So, beyond me to say I love this film, but I was interested to see it because I read the book when I was when I was a teenager. There was a guy in my flat where I lived, and he'd read J.G. Ballard. So my sort of thing I think that got wrong with the film, I think it would have been better to set it in an alternative version of the 70s. I think if you made it now, like Ben Wheatley did with High Rise, you're kind of setting it in a sort of 1970s. So when you read the book, it's got images and things you'd recognise, but then it's kind of stuff you don't. And it would have been great, maybe if they could change it and had real kind of star cameos. I'm sure there's a bit where Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton appear in the book of Crash. Or the character of Vaughn's talking about wanting to crash cars with them. It got into loads of problems with this film did with the censors, which I don't know why really. I think it's got a lot of kind of full-on sex scenes, but I just think it's the suggestion of the, shagging wounds and the way the sex is intertwined with car accidents. It's not funny, it's kind of dark humour. Is the one where they restaged the Jane Mansfield crash, with the dead pooch, and I think she got decapitated. But a really interesting score by Howard Shaw for this. Normally he does orchestral scores, but he uses kind of jangly, clanky guitars on this with a lot of delay on with orchestral elements, pardon me. It's good. James Spade is quite effective in his sort of yuppie blank phase. The first two choices are not great films, but watch them. The next choice again is flawed, but it was sort of kind of him returning to what we knew him for, and this came out in 1999, it's Existenz. So this had more of a kind of Canadian feel of his Canadian films, and it had some of the kind of body horror image with the gun and stuff, like from Videodrome, but it looked into virtual reality, but which is a kind of 90s cliche, but it did it in a Cronenberg way. It was far more interesting. It had a good cast: Jennifer Jason Leigh, Jude Law, Ian Holm, William Dafoe, Chris Eccleston. It's a long time since I've seen this. I wasn't blown away by it, but like Cronenberg's one of those directors, when he's not firing all cylinders, he's always interesting. If you watch his film A Dangerous Method by Psychoanalysis with Viggo Mortensen, it's not a great film, but it's not uninteresting. So that's why I'm putting this in here at number 8. So my number 7. Again, this film suffers from sort of his what I call his Canadian period. Some of the acting's maybe not what it should be, some of the visuals, but there's just something about this film, and it's 1979, it's The Brood. So this is a rare appearance of Oliver Reed in a film that we might give a shit about after kind of his 60s and 70s to mid-70s heyday. So he plays a scientist at a special research place for women with mental health issues, and he does a really extreme form of therapy. The upshot of this is a Samantha Egger character, her inner rage has created an ectopic pregnancy that unleashes demonic children, demonic kind of faceless, monstrous children that kill people. It sounds bonkers when the children are kind of running around hacking people. Yeah, it's pretty crap, but there's just something, the idea is kind of ahead of its time. If you imagine now if he made this with the sort of Me Too thing and sexual politics being, and how women are treated being very much back on the agenda. I mean, you could see this in the 70s feminist cycle. It's a kind of extreme look at that. Someone's like a kind of, I suppose, oppressed housewife or doesn't have that level of expression in her life, and her reproductive capability of reproduction unleashes horror. And obviously this is is early example of body horror. In actual fact, obviously Rabid and Shivers, his first two films, are body horror. Scanners and this. His the body horror in those films is made sort of explicit. It's externalized in a way. Pardon me. Okay. Next one is number 6. So this again is part of his upward swing recently. He's kind of making some really good films. This is Map to the Stars. So this is a Hollywood satire thriller. It's really good. 2014, really good cast. Julianne Moore with Mia Wasikowska, Olivia Williams, Evan Bird, John Cusack, Robert Pattinson. They're all really good. What about this one? Julianne Moore's great, and she plays this kind of selfish, self-obsessed Hollywood star. Mia Wasikowska becomes a kind of housekeeper assistant. The film climaxes in a really bloody death, and the character self-immolates as well, and it's got like there's kind of incest in it as well, and it's really dark, but I thought it was really good. His film before it, Cosmopolis, I couldn't really quite get the grips with. That was with Robert Pattinson, but Pattinson's an interesting actor, and this was one of the films he did after Twilight to kind of stretch out, as it were. Howard Shore on music duties, as always. This is where, obviously, we know him from Lord of the Rings, but Cronenberg is where he started doing his scores, and he always does Cronenberg films. And Peter Shasitsky, I think that's how you pronounce it, he's always Cronenberg cinematographer, I think. Well, I'll check a little deeper on that. Okay, my number 5 choice, 1988's Dead Ringers. So here's a film, Cronenberg stretching out of the horror genre and going more into psychological horror. So Jeremy Irons plays twins. This is in, I suppose, early CGI days, but it looks really realistic. Brilliant performance. He subtly plays the two sides of the identical twins. They're medical doctors, famous gynecologists. One's more alpha and one's more beta, but they're two sides of the same coin, and their behaviour, they basically have the relationship with the same woman, played by Genevieve Bujold, but their behaviour starts to overlap and they start psychologically disintegrate, and the personalities kind of meld, I suppose. A bit like Birmingham's Persona. Great, again, Peter Shastitsky is on cinematography, Howard Shore's present. Irons is great in this. I mean, he won the Oscar for the next year or the year after for Reversal of Fortune, but really he should have been nominated for this and had a good shot at winning. Very clever. His performance is not showy. I think he walked on one foot, put his weight on one foot more than the other, depending which twin he was, and that was his way to kind of go, right, now I'm this twin. This is how this twin behaves. This is his journey, and then put his weight on the other foot, and so on. Don't quote us on that, look that up. But it's a good film, quite a slow burn, 115 minutes, but I went to see this. It was the first Cronenberg film I saw at the Pictures, and, you know, the kind of films, like, you know, although I enjoyed it at the time, you just have to, I probably didn't enjoy it as much as some other films I've seen at the time, but you kind of have to go back to them. Okay, so that's my number 5 choice. Might be a shock list. My number 4 choice is a film, it kind of got mixed reviews, but I just thought it was really good, and it's 2002's Spider. So this stars Ralph Fiennes as a mental patient who's been released back into society. He's called Dennis Clegg. He's schizophrenic. He's given a room in a halfway house, and he starts to relive the childhood of his 50s. So if I was looking for a comparison for this, if you've seen 10 Rillington Place, it managed to capture that austere slum clearance London. But it's really good. It kind of pulls the narrative rug. It's kind of a mystery of his mind. And Miranda Richardson's very good as his mum. Gabriel Byrne's good. It's not many cast in it. It's really geared on Ralph Fiennes. In actual fact, it's got 85% on Rotten Tomatoes. I tell a lie, this was well received. But it just seemed to come and go. I went to the Pictures to see it. I'm not sure why, really. I just sort of read and I thought, I'll go and see the new Cronenberg with Ralph Fiennes. And it's one of Fiennes' best performances. He kind of does this stuttering, mumbling kind of thing where, you know, it's like his mind's in disarray and then his fractured, but it gets into his mindset. And, you know, the past and present collide. I mean, when he gets out of hospital, I guess, you know, I wouldn't say it's necessarily set in the present day because it's quite a bit after the 1950s, but I'm not sure. But I really like this film. I think it's really good. So again, Cronenberg dealing with horror, but the horror of the mind. Dead Ringers, Spider, that collapse, as it were. My number 3 choice is probably the film that people know him best for, horror classic from 1986, and his one proper box office hit. He always gets funding for his films, and when they're sold, you know, DVD abroad and stuff, they must make enough money for the guy, like Woody Allen films, I guess, to go, right, we'll give Cronenberg some more money. But this was a $9 to $15 million budget, and it grossed $60 million back in 1986. Of course, it's The Fly. If you released it now, you know, it would gross probably about $200 million worldwide. So for a Cronenberg, that's big money. So this is a remake of The Fly, the Vincent Price film, and with that he just has a huge fly head. What's amazing about this is Jeff Goldblum's experiments. When the fly gets in his portal, it causes bodily disintegration and metamorphosis. His bodily disintegration actually reminds me, if you've seen the Chernobyl miniseries, the depiction of cellular decay. In that is kind of what happens to him. So, and obviously the original Fly is set in the nuclear era, so it's really clever. Cronenberg, he's kind of got that reference in there. It's pure sci-fi. He's doing experiments with transmitting matter. There's a horrible bit. He transmits a monkey and it comes back in a total mess. It's really horrible. Again, Howard Shaw's on music, but a guy called Mark Irwin's on cinematography. He's nicely shot this. I think what upscales this and his subsequent film, the two films I'm going to pick, is the acting's excellent. He's kind of got away from the Scanners Brood thing, and he's got a great performance from Jeff Goldblum. Before Jeff Goldblum was, Jeff Goldblum, and he uses his kind of bug-eyed, otherworldly wonderness to perfect effect. And Gina Davis was a breakout role for her. She's really good. It ends up as a tragic love story. Really good. It's got disgusting, he's vomiting on food. It looks at putrefaction, and that's the other thing where it's interesting. As humans, we don't want to think about things like shit and vomit and our insides and stuff like that, particularly English. But this just kind of lays it all bare, and he starts putting, specimens of things that have fallen off, including his own penis, in a jar. It's really good. There's loads of depth to this film. The flip side of that is it gives the horror fan what they want, which is lots of gore. And so it's a perfect, it was perfect in 1986. It kind of sat with the other cycle of horror films at that time when the gore levels and effects levels were getting better. But it's got this really mature adult story. It is, talking about it now, it's a bit of a masterpiece. I think you've got to say that. So, a lot of people put this number one. Now I'm talking about it, maybe it should be higher. My number two choice is, this I would say is the first Cronenberg film I probably saw on TV, and it's 1983's The Dead Zone. So what distinguishes this, interesting enough, Michael Kamen does the music and Mark Irwin's on cinematography, so Kamen does a really nice score for this. I think this is kind of his first kind of Hollywood film. He gets like a fairly well-known star in Christopher Walken and a great supporting cast. Anthony Zerbe, Colin Jost, Martin Sheen as the Trumpian Greg Stilson, Herbert Lom, Tom Skerritt, Brooke Adams, who's don't see her much now, really good actress. Hasn't seen him in remake versions of The Body Snatch and Days of Heaven. So I don't know what happened to her. We'll have a look later. But this was quite popular. It's saying here I grossed 16 or 20 million back in the day on a budget of $7 or $10 million. So a reasonable size hit. I think what's great about this, it starts off very atmospherically with a superb credit sequence where the title is kind of comes in slowly and images are kind of silhouetted behind it, which is really cool. Walken, he has a tragic accident, and again, this is the horror. The horror of this is what happens to Walken. He wakes from a coma, and like other Cronenberg films, he has developed the second sight. But this is a curse and a burden to him. He's physically disabled from being in his coma for so long, but he's becomes a bit of a freak show, I suppose, because people find out about his powers. And it kind of goes on from there. I just really like the pacing of it. There's a couple of violent bits, but it's more the horror is more about what happens to Chris Walken's character. It's based on the Stephen King book, and again, this is at the part of the cycle, the era where really the directors were attracted to King books. So obviously it started with De Palma with Carrie, then you had the great TV adaptation of Salem's Lot, Tobe Hooper, a good horror filmmaker. Then, of course, Kubrick with The Shining. And then John Carpenter and Cronenberg doing Dead Zone and Christine in 83. So in his early days, these King adaptations were really good. Then the quality died off. Maybe as his books weren't as good. Misery, good one though. And the other one, I forget it's got Kathy Bates, and it's more of a drama. It's good. Okay, so let's go back through our top 10 at Cronenberg. At number 10, we have Scanners, 9 Crash, 8 Existence, 7 The Brood, 6 Map to the Stars, 5 Dead Ringers, 4 Spider, 3 The Fly, and 2 Dead Ringers. So, may surprise the horror fans out there, but I just think pound for pound, his best film is A History of Violence from 2005. This really took people by surprise, I think, because you wouldn't expect Cronenberg to make what's essentially a straight ahead thriller, but he just, the story's really rich, the acting's excellent, and the way it develops is really good. And I think the theme of it ties in with his other work, because essentially Viggo Mortensen has all this violence in him, this stuff he's capable of, and he just totally suppresses it, and he's got his regular life running his cafe. He's probably not punched anyone or anything for years. And then the opening scene of this is great with the two bad guys, like a Western. The two bad guys rolling into town to the motel, and you can tell they're sinister, not just because of the music, the way they're dressed. Forget the actor playing the main bad guy. But he's really striking. And then obviously it kicks off in the cafe, and it just explodes. Mortensen, he smashes the coffee pot, he uses the gun, and just shows that he's lost none of his skill set. And obviously this brings him out into the open, and Ed Harris comes back. Joey, really good. Ed Harris is magnificent. William Hurt, later on in the film, Mortensen goes back to LA. I think I was at Philadelphia. Yes, Philadelphia, apologies. It's Irish mob. And there's just a great climax, and really good. I mean, Maria Bello's really good. The only hollow moment is the kid playing his son's not great, and he goes like, he mentions some line about whacking people, but it just doesn't work. But other than that, the last line, Jesus Joey, Jesus Richie's really, really cool. This is a really good film. This it did quite well at the box office, $32 million budget, $60 million gross. This should have had Oscar nominations. It got one for William Hurt for Best Supporting Actor. I'm just looking at a few more. Yeah, it was voted quite high in a lot of critics' polls. Best writing in the Oscars, but that was it. Where was Mortensen? Where was Bello? Where was Cronenberg? This was a perfect opportunity to give the guy some recognition. This is one of the absolute best directed films that year. So that's my number one choice. I just think that's a great thriller. One last thing, there's a bit where he kicks off in front of his house and he punches a guy in the nose. I think he breaks his nose and sends it up into his brain. And again, it just shows Cronenberg's ability to kind of show visceral violence. So that was my Cronenberg top 10. I'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.